get an idea, and you just throw yourself straight out in the research. And you start following one lead, and you discover another, which is very interesting. So you start following that lead, which leads to another lead. And then at some point, you're not really sure anymore what you're investigating, and you have forgotten what you were looking into when you started. And suddenly the research has grown too large to control. And we've suddenly been there many times, me and Jessica. And it's not just tempting sidetracks that can complicate matters when you're doing investigative journalism. As you all know in here, probably, investigations are time-consuming, can be very complicated and sensitive, and you will bump into a whole lot of problems during the way. So having sort of a well-thought-out plan for how you actually work is a good idea in many ways, we think.
Me and Emma, we have been working together for several years. We work in two daily newspapers in the south of Sweden. And we've been thinking a lot about what we are doing when we are investigating. What are the steps that we take? Where do we get stuck? And maybe most important, what were the keys when we had a successful investigation? We've picked up tips from many other journalists, from conferences like this, and then we have developed our own way of working together with our colleagues. We have divided the process into 4 stages, 4 phases, we call them. The startup, research, the writing, and the end phase. And then we have listed what to do in each phase, not only for the reporter, but also for the editor. That gives us a common ground and makes it a lot easier for everyone that we are collaborating with as well. And yes, this spring we also published the book, and as Sofia said, maybe some of you have to learn Swedish first before you read it. But one thing we've learned is that the startup phase is very important when you do an investigation.
Yeah, so let's start here by talking about the idea. How do you choose what to investigate, and how do you know if a tip is worth pursuing? And of course, we and many other journalists talk about a gut feeling for what makes a good story. And sure, that is very useful, and it's often based on great experience. But we think there are methods to more actively choose what ideas to go through with. And in recent years, we have focused much more on this startup phase. We realized that this will save us a lot of time and trouble along the way. So our first advice is that put some more effort and time into this phase of the investigation, and you will be rewarded at the end. We use a checklist to sort of test our idea. And this is something we use right in the beginning. Just when we get a tip or have starting to discuss an idea, shouldn't we investigate this and this? And we have listed some criteria that are important to us, what investigations we want to do in our newsroom. And so this checklist is meant to be a tool for us to more easily determine, is this an investigation we should undertake or not? And by discussing the idea, it's just taking it out from your head and putting it into words and discussing it together. You can identify weaknesses, we think, fairly quickly. And you can narrow it down, because you often start too broadly, it's just very wide and diffuse. And you can sharpen the idea before you go into that research stage. And this has helped us to avoid, we do get stuck in sidetracks still, of course, but I think it has helped us to avoid getting there all too often nowadays.
Now, these questions in the checklist, they are simple, but they're also more efficient than you first might think. Okay, here they are. The first one.
Here they are not. They disappeared from the screen.
They disappeared. Okay.
Something. Is this something happening? Vilken sladd tänker ni? Nej. Jaha, stå till bordet. Okej. Reboot. Keep up the suspense.
So maybe you saw the first question. What is the problem you want to investigate? Okay, this might seem obvious, but the fact is, it's not always clear when you start when you get an investigative idea. Maybe some of you recognize it. This first question forces you to go to the core. What's the story? You should formulate it in one or maybe a couple of sentences, and if there are more angles, you need to identify which one is the most important one, because you can't do everything. If you can't answer this question shortly in a couple of sentences, there is a risk that this idea is too broad and too vague. And in that case, the research will become difficult. You might manage, but it will take a longer time. A focused investigation provides a much better chance to go all the way to the bottom. And you know that are the investigations that will turn out the best.
Yes. This is the second question. Is it of public interest? And that might seem even more obvious, but because thinking about public interest is what journalism is about every day. And still, at least we have abandoned several ideas, investigative ideas, after we have asked this question out loud. Is it really relevant for others and relevant for a whole lot of other people? Because remember, we're going to put a lot of time and resources into this investigation.
And the third question is, can it be proven? The purpose of this question is to consider early how the problem and the story can be investigated. At this stage, of course, we don't know yet, and the research hasn't begun. So it's not about providing evidence, but rather to imagine, how will I get the evidence to prove this? What documents do I need? What interviews, films, photos, all of that. And if much is confidential or relies heavily on anonymous sources, how will you then proceed?
His computer is not on our side. No. You touch the screen? Okay, so we should... No, the
I saw.
Thank you. And okay, you just have to take our word for it that the question number 4 is, does it really require an investigation? And again, we have listed the criteria that are important for us, and we want to do investigative stories. We don't want to do extended news articles. So therefore, we need to ensure that this is just what we are about to start is an investigation. Because we use the definition, which is just common, I suppose, among others, many, that a central feature is that investigative journalism includes an investigation, not just getting your hands on a secret report or something like that. So therefore, this is essential for us when we are picking our stories, because we work in a newsroom where there are lots of ideas just bouncing up all the time. And a lot of them seems to be sort of investigations, but they are really not. So this is why we want to put our resources into the right sort of job. So this is why this is on our list. And the investigation itself can, of course, take various forms, and you will get many, many tips from this on methods in this conference. We have one example that I thought we could show here. No. Okay, yes, thank you. Okay, a few years ago, these became a common sight on the streets of our capital, Stockholm, at first. And during 2020, they became visible in Malmö as well, which is the city in southern Sweden where we work. And suddenly you can see them everywhere, dressed in pink. They delivered pizza and hamburgers to your door. You know the concept? Yes? A very convenient way to get your dinner, of course. But there were signs that the employees were working under very poor conditions. And there had been some other media coverage in Stockholm that said so as well. And now when they were showing up in Malmö, and they were everywhere, used by everywhere, our readers, the citizens of Malmö, we wanted to investigate the company here behind this. And we used our checklist when we discussed the idea, and we concluded, yes, there is a potential misconduct here, a wrongdoing, which has, how they are treated, the employees. And we thought, yes, it's of public interest to tell the story, but how should we proceed? We could have interviewed employees, but we knew that they would have to be anonymous because they were afraid. A lot of them are just newly arrived in Sweden also, so they don't have the sort of stable ground to stand on, if you know what I mean. And that in turn would have made it much harder for us to verify their statements, and we couldn't ask questions about their cases because that would reveal their identities. And it would probably also be easy for the management to dismiss these anonymous stories. So instead, we decided to go undercover and see for ourselves. And this is a method that we use very rarely and just after long discussions, and so it should be, we think. Anyway, this is our colleague, Don Ivarsson. He applied for a job, and he was hired. And so he was pedaling the streets of Malmö for a month, and after that he could tell the story of how he and other delivery guys were constantly monitored, rated, and pressured to pedal faster. And if you didn't comply, you were fired. And this wasn't just a story about one company. What made it more interesting was that it's also a story about the new labor market in the gig economy.
So the fifth question is, for us, is it a local story? Because we work in the south of Sweden and we want our stories to begin there. And if you're not a local journalist, you might have another criteria here, depending on your audience. But this is very important to us. And this is the famous building in Malmö, the Turning Torso.
Number 6, is it unknown? Because nobody wants to put several weeks of work into something that is already well known. And sometimes you want to do it anyway, but you need to know what has been done and what can we contribute to additionally. And don't assume that nothing has been done just because you haven't heard about it. So a little bit of research here.
Question number 7. Is someone affected? Take some time to think about who will be affected, who is affected of this, and how will you find them? It's our mission to show the consequences, but as you all know, it's much easier to tell the investigative story if you have cases. Here behind is Bertil. During the pandemic, his wife suddenly found a document in a folder at home. It stated that Bertil should not be allowed to go to the hospital if he falls ill. He should not receive any intensive care whatsoever. That's a decision a doctor can make to prevent suffering for people who are very weak or terminally ill. But by law in Sweden, this decision must be taken during a meeting with the patient or the relatives. And the problem was that nor Bertil nor his wife had been to such a meeting. We started digging into this, and we found how doctors during the pandemic were systematically excluding older people from healthcare without even seeing them and charging for meetings that had never taken place. The reactions when we published were huge, and several healthcare centers had to pay fines. But the fact is here, we didn't know about Bertil when we started this investigation. We had a tip about a woman, but she and her relatives absolutely not wanted to be in the newspaper. We had done the research, we had the story, but we had no cases. So we spent a lot of time researching and finding more affected persons. We were following in complaints to the Health and Social Care Inspectorate and calling relatives to people who died in COVID-19. And eventually, we then found Bertil and several other persons as well that could be a part of our article. And we believe that that was a big part of the impact this investigation had.
This question number 8, is it engaging? And when we discussed the idea from this question on our checklist, we try to imagine when we publish. This is we're in a very, very early stage, so it's just it's very imaginative. But how will the readers, the viewers, the listeners react when we publish what we think we could publish or hope we could publish, or if it is like this? Does it make anyone angry? And what do you think would be the most upsetting? And it may happen that you go through the checklist and you agree that this is an important story that we need to investigate, because if it's true, it needs to be told. But yet, when you discuss it from this angle, you just don't feel anything. It doesn't feel engaging. And usually, that is because you have started with this too broad perspective. And you're trying to include everything in your investigation. And that's a common problem for us. And usually that leads in the end to a lame result. So we work harder now to narrow it down already from the start, because it's quite easily to expand an investigation along the way if you think that's necessary. It's more difficult to narrow it down, and you will get lost, or we have gotten lost so many times. So we try to start with a very narrow perspective at first anyway.
Another important thing with an investigative project is to find the responsible and to speak this question out loud right at the beginning. Can someone be responsible for this? Helps us to define if this is a job we should do or not. Maybe sometimes it's not that easy, like it's just the manager or the politician, or a problem has been going on for a long time, so there can be several managers, several politicians responsible for what happened.
And then the final question on our checklist: are you looking forward to doing the job? And I don't know if this might sound provocative, perhaps, for someone here in this room. Why should our feelings matter when we're about to investigate a story that might include abuse of power, misconduct, injustices. But we think of it like this, that engagement is crucial to succeed with an investigative project. So we don't think we should start without it, because this will occupy you for a long time, and you will have doubts, many doubts, probably. So yes, you must look forward to doing the job. And what if the answer to this question is no? We think that then there's probably a reason, and you should just find that reason. And this is the 10 questions. Easy, not sort of very exciting questions, but this helps us to discuss ideas in a more structured way. And as I said in the beginning, it takes the idea out of your head, and especially if you work many people together, you need to speak about the same things, because we have discovered that quite often I think that Jessica is thinking the same as I do, and then she's not, because she's thinking in a slightly different way, and that will lead us off track. And this is a stage you shouldn't just take the quick way and answer yes, 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 let's go ahead to all the questions. It's not a test. It's a way to challenge your idea and to push the idea and push yourself. And we don't use this for long. It's perhaps 45 minutes. It's just the first station on the way.
Or less, if you know the subject, you can do this in 15 minutes, just thinking about it.
Yeah, and we have it sort of internalized these questions now also, so we keep them in mind. But for us, the idea doesn't have to meet all these criteria, but if you get a no on most of these questions, maybe you shouldn't pursue that particular investigation, because there are many others waiting to be done, and you have to choose which one you want to spend your time on. And if you find this sort of a way interesting, but you don't think this checklist, it doesn't fit you, perhaps you could find the questions that are important to your newsroom, your group. And the important thing, we think at least, is just to find a structured way to discuss an idea. And that will also make it less sort of sensitive to abandon ideas, because it's not like it's your idea and it's bad. We are discussing all the ideas in this way, and we agree on what sort of criteria we need to think should be in place. Mm-hmm. Someone is knocking on the door.
Okay, the checklist is done. Let's start the research, right? Yeah, not yet. If the idea still sounds promising after this checklist, it's time for the pre-study. We need to decide what we are going to do, when and how. It might seem like a pre-study is something for the bigger newsrooms with lots of resources and time. But in fact, this is very useful. This is a very useful tool also for smaller newsrooms. We work in regional and local, and in smaller newsrooms you might just do 1 or 2 investigations a year. We make more, but in other places. And then you have to be sure that you choose the right idea. And when you also are working in teams, it's important that everyone has the same picture of what you're going to do. Otherwise, there is a risk that you are heading in different directions.
And we have a manual, yes, of course, for this as well. And this is what our pre-study looks like. And these are the headlines that we sort of go through. The hypothesis that we shall return to. Why should we do the job? This is if you don't have unlimited time and resources, you need to choose, as Jessica said. And you need to balance the importance of the job with the time and resources required. And we talk about the method, how will we conduct the investigation, a maximum and minimum level, how far do we think we can reach? Maybe this is sort of things that you recognize or you discuss in similar ways. What has previously been published, we dig into that a bit deeper here in this stage. And we do a time estimate. This is often very challenging in this stage. I mean, who knows how long time it could take. But we try at least, because at least is this a quick research investigation? We need to perhaps narrow it down even more. And it's also good for your colleagues to know, because they have things to plan. The hypothesis, we're going to talk a bit more about that. This is the most important thing in our pre-study. And working with hypothesis, we think, is the best way of making sure that your investigation doesn't get all over the place. And we have developed our work in this area after being inspired by the International Investigation Handbook Story-Based Inquiry, which probably you perhaps recognize or familiar with. I think several of the authors, they are here at the conference, perhaps not in this room. Anyway, the task here is to formulate a hypothesis, and the purpose is to pinpoint what you should investigate, what you're going to try to find out, so it becomes clear to everyone. And we include what you perhaps might already know, what you believe, and what you fear has happened. And this means that the ingredients can be perhaps some documents that you have already obtained, as well as unverified information from tips. And it can also include your own assumptions about what might have happened and what consequences it might have had. And here we use our own background knowledge and experience. And according to the story-based inquiry model, we try to include who is affected and who's responsible already at this stage. And in other words, it's to capture the whole story. And that is a way to help you to keep your eye on the ball all the way through. Because in the end, you want to tell a story that you want to reach out with and not just list a bunch of facts. So this is sort of to capture it from the beginning. And that has been helpful for us, at least. And the hypothesis needs to be concrete and as precise as you can, because you're going to use it to start your research. You're going to test it, and if it's just too vague, how are you going to test it? And something very important, that a hypothesis sort of is it's just an assumption. You don't know if it is like this. You're going to start your investigation, your research. But this gives you something to start with, and that is the most important thing, to not just start in any direction, but to start in one direction, and then it might take you, it probably will take you other directions during the way.
And we have just one small example of how a hypothesis can look like. And I'm going to read it because I think maybe you don't see it down there. The company hires men from Romania to work in the construction industry. They are being forced to remove asbestos without sufficient protection, which can lead to cancer. They are living in illegal housing in industrial buildings and are getting paid under the table. The family who runs the company lives in a luxurious villa and drives expensive sport cars. The business continues despite the fact that the tax authorities have repeatedly uncovered tax evasion. And this is from a job that we actually did.
Yeah, and it's sort of it's not a really authentic hypothesis, but it has the ingredients of the different parts that I was talking about. And when it is concrete, I mean, are they living in illegal housing? Are they living in industrial buildings, the first? And the second, is that illegal, or is it perhaps not illegal? It is illegal, but anyway. You can use this to start to find out what is true, because often you do start with some sort of assumption what has happened. Why do you want to do an investigation? You have some leads you want to follow, And if you formulate a hypothesis, you can more easily start to do the research. But you must remember that you cannot just look in one direction. Your mission to find out the truth, how, at least as far as you can get. So, of course, you must be open to the possibility that the hypothesis doesn't hold up at all, or just to some parts. But also that it could be much worse, or in an entirely different way. And it's easy to get a tunnel vision when you do investigative journalism, and you need to put up some control stations along the way. And we're not going to talk about that in depth now, but it's you need to be aware of that. So you test the hypothesis, and what doesn't turn out to be true, you cross it out, and you change that as you get new facts along the way, when you start knowing what's going on. And in the beginning, we talked about the editor a bit. I mean, usually we talk about the reporter, at least I think, in investigative journalism. How many of you are editors in here, this room? Okay, good to see. We're both very interested in the editor's role in investigative journalism. And we think that when you are developing how you work with investigations, you should also consider the editor's role and how that can be improved. It's not just the reporters that should improve their methods to find out, to do research. You, as an editor, should improve your way of leading the project. And as a reporter, you can help the editor by saying what sort of assistance do you need in different stages of the investigation, and together you can develop a workflow. And that's how we have worked at our newspapers, that we have together made a workflow where the editor and the reporters have different tasks, but they are equally important.
So we're going to tell you more about how the editor work. But first we want to talk about the case of Anna. Is that okay?
Yeah. Or perhaps I was supposed to say just the two tasks for the editor in the startup phase. No, I'm sorry. Jessica. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to leave the floor now to Jessica. I'm sorry.
You can tell. You will be welcome to tell about the editor. It's like a cliffhanger now.
Yeah.
So you are going to know everything about the editor's role as well. But when we work with the hypothesis, it's always important to not just have a look at what you wrote at the first time. And the case of Anna was a story we did a couple of years ago. Anna and her friend hasn't seen each other for a long time when they embrace each other at the central station in Malmö. Much has happened since they last met, and the most important thing, Anna has become a mother. Her friend has traveled all the way from Lithuania to see the 4-month-old boy. At a nearby intersection, 2 police officers recognizes a silver-colored Mercedes. It has been used by 2 brothers, previously suspected for several crimes. So they started following the car. But the brothers in the Mercedes hit the gas pedal. Witnesses estimate the car is racing over 170 kilometers per hour in the center of the town. Anna and her friends are talking, laughing as they go home to her apartment. They are pushing the baby in the stroller, and suddenly they hear screeching tires. People in the area think a bomb just has exploded. But it is the Mercedes crashing into a row of cars. One of them flies up in the air and lands right on top of Anna and the stroller. A few years later, we get a tip of what happened to Anna. The baby has, like a miracle, survived, but for Anna, things seem worse. She has been severely injured. had to amputate her leg and had lost her ability to speak. And as if that wasn't enough, she has moved and lives now alone in an apartment with assistants who don't know who she is or who she's been. All her belongings are laying in black trash bags in the attic. And she has also lost the contact with her son. When we meet her, she hasn't seen him for 6 months, and there isn't a single picture of him in the apartment. This tip led to our first hypothesis, where we focused on authorities and relatives and how they all acted wrongly. We thought we had a clear picture of what had happened. We just had to document it and find the evidence for it. But when we start fact-checking the claims step by step, we see that they are challenging to prove, and some things just aren't true. However, we find something else. It turns out that Anna has got a legal guardian. I don't know if that's the correct word in every country, but it is a person, if you can longer make decisions for yourselves about healthcare, financing and living, you get a person that can do that, all that for you. But it seems that this legal guardian is not always acting for her well-being. He has forbidden her partner and the father of the child to visit her. And since the child now lives with his father, the contact has broken. Also, friends and families are not allowed to visit her whenever they want. They need to ask for permission. And that's not easy, because this legal guardian does not answer the phone nor emails. We abandon the old hypothesis and decide to switch track and instead focus on investigating the guardian's actions. And soon we understand why he has no contact with the family. He probably doesn't have the time. We reveal that he is the guardian for another 60 people. And Anna is not the only one who had suffered from his actions. Now, this story shed the light on what the problems with legal guardians in Sweden. The municipality started several own investigations and trying to get Anna and her son back in contact. But we also learned something. We really learned that you must be able to change direction in your hypothesis and to reformulate it when it's needed.
And there, the editor. Okay, and I should speed up a bit. Anyway, as I said before, we believe that the editor's role is important, and one role is to make sure that you do switch tracks when needed. We just finished the startup phase with saying that there are many tasks. We don't talk about everything here, but 2 important tasks for the editor in this startup phase is that, according to how we work, ensure that the checklist and the pre-study are carried out and make sure that everything is written down. And make sure you do not end up with this saying just, let's go ahead and see how it turns out. No, you shouldn't do that. And the first meetings are important because this is where you make a plan for your investigation, and ensure that if you are the editor, stay till the end of the meetings and don't rush away, because we have learned that one of the most common problems is that the editor is not present in the beginning, and then the editor will not be included in the team, and you can't play that important role. Yes, so maybe we need to speed up our tempo here.
No, we have done all the groundwork.
Yes. Finally.
Pre-study is ready, and now we're going to do the real research, where you will try to find and verify all the information with all your smart methods, and here we have some tips to give so that you can continue to work systematically. You know, when you start an investigation, it suddenly looks like this. So keep order, make your organize it in your computer, all your documents, and name them correctly, all documents and every interview, everything.
Another good tip is to use a journal, sort of a diary for the team. We just use the simplest form with a date, and we write everything we do. This is not authentic, just how it could look like. Day by day, what you do. I even write up if I call someone and that person didn't answer the phone, because suddenly you're going to call 10 persons and you forget who did I call and who did not answer. Perhaps that's just me. Anyway, we also briefly note conclusions and questions that arise and important information from a report, and you take out the most important part and put it in the journal. And if you have some questions that arise. And then don't forget to read through the journal from time to time, because sometimes, quite often actually, previous information that you got in the beginning that you noted but didn't think was that interesting becomes more interesting when new facts emerge.
So keep order, use the journal. We also love to do lists, and we make them all the time. And another thing we like is
timeline, yes. List just events based on date, and it provides a good overview, and you can see if it lacks anything, and you can do a more specific research on that gap.
Mm-hmm.
And is there some words about the editor now? Yes, the editor in the research phase. We think that in this phase, the editor can take a step back, because the reporters should do the research, not the editor. But you still have some important tasks to sort of pull the project further on, and do regular check-ins. In that way, you can easily and early get a hold of any problems that have occurred. I should, of course, review the hypothesis, change it as you have learned new facts. Show interest in what the reporters are doing, but do not get into details, because you need to keep the overview as the editor. You need to question what you need to be a bit tough, of course, also. And make decisions about sidetracks. And again, we believe it's important. We do anyway now. If a sidetrack emerges, we say, are we going to follow this and abandon the other one? Or are we just going to say no and not do like this? Oh, we could investigate that a bit more just on the side, because that would take so much time, more time than you think. So make decisions about sidetracks and stick to them. And then also push the team to go further and really get the questions answered, all the questions answered. Yeah, I think that was that.
So we have come to the writing phase, and don't wait too long to start write the article or the manuscript. It helps you to see what are you missing when you start writing, and this is a good advice, even though the research isn't complete. It's always good to start somewhere. And here is the editor's time to shine, because here can the editor really be helpful, right?
To read and give constructive feedback, and then read again and give some more feedback, and together you will make the best article.
So we've come to the end phase, and we're getting close to deadline. We're about to publish soon, and there are many things to do here. And the most important thing is to check the facts. We are regional and local newspapers, but we always do line by line on our investigations. As it says, line by line, explain how we know this, what documents do we have, what evidences. And is a well-known method for fact-checking and very useful, we think. Every piece of information, every statement, number, and even the conclusions in the Finnish investigations are verified. And this is time-consuming but necessary. It's also important to do it well in advance before publishing, so that you can make that extra research you need before publishing. Often it's not to take things away if you can't really prove them. It's more about then getting the documents or the last evidences in the end to really prove that it is like you said. Active fact-checking also makes it easier for the editor-in-chief to make decisions about publishing names and other ethical and legal issues. And we know that it doesn't matter if you have worked many years or just started your career. Errors can always be made. Sometimes it's due to carelessness, sometimes you've miscalculated, and sometimes you actually misunderstood something.
And the editor in the final phase, that everyone is usually quite tired by this time, and now it's about to keeping up the energy to make the necessary adjustments. And it's easy to want to take shortcuts in the end, just get it over with, just publish it and move on. And your role as an editor is to make sure that no one takes the shortcuts, and not yourself either. And before the whole investigation goes to print, ask the final question. This is a simple but very brilliant, we think, trick that we picked up at a lecture by Mariana Walker-Guevara, now Deputy Director of the Pulitzer Center, former head of the ICIJ, which has led huge investigations like the Panama Papers. And she said that on a conference some years ago, that when everything is ready to be published, sit down with your reporters and ask the questions: what will keep you awake the night before publication? Is there something bothering you? What gives you a bit of a stomach ache? And we have used this a lot, and often there is something. And it might be a certain sentence that is not really wrong, but doesn't have the right tone, and you don't feel comfortable with that as a reporter. A piece of information that's not relevant to the context. And it can be something that has gone through all these control stations and the fact-checking, which is very thorough, but still shouldn't be there. And often that's quite easily fixed. And when you have fixed that, it's sort of the final touch to everything. And you can feel confident as a reporter, as an editor-in-chief, with the whole piece.
Yes.
Yes.
We're ready to publish. And for the investigative team, this is the end. But to the audience, it's just the beginning, and there is so much more to be done. But that we have to talk about another time. And instead, we conclude by leaving you with this encouragement. Take a step back and look at how you work, and you will also be able to find things to improve. Thank you for listening.